Mark, let's kick off. I'm very happy to be able to finally sit down with you, record a session, get into the details all around careers. So, recording for 14, 15 months. And I think with your experience, definitely going to be one of the most like targeted person around careers, especially for young people, I think, because that's what you focus on, isn't it?
That is indeed what I do.
What's kind of got you really kind of interested in that first though? Like why is it that you've kind of focused on that particular area? Same with me, like I've kind of started this podcast, I think because obviously I'm in that kind of bracket. But why was it for you that you really kind of were like, okay, I want to pass off what I've learned over the last 5, 10 years, whatever?
I would say it's two things. The first one being I always felt underqualified and like I had the lowest chance of anybody in the room to get the best roles. And on paper, that was always true. For example, my master's program, I always thought I was the least intelligent and least knowledgeable. I came from the most unknown name undergrad, had the lowest GPA, did the worst on GRE. So I always felt like I didn't stand a chance for anything. And my whole career was about thinking outside the box, how to beat everyone to the good positions, even though I was the least qualified. And doing that for almost a decade gave me some really interesting insight and ideas. And I noticed nobody else is doing them. So it became a little game. And it's always been fun trying to educate other people and using these skills.
So even on that, let's say your grades weren't the best. Let's say you weren't coming from the best university or the best undergrad or whatever it was. Why is it that you kept kind of pursuing that path and tried to get into the best firms versus kind of settling? Because in those scenarios, people will say, "Oh, you're not good enough," and then just go off and do something else. Isn't that right?
Well, so I would never have gone for, let's say, a tier 1 position at a tier 1 firm, because even using clever tactics, that's nearly impossible. And when you set yourself up for failure, you fail. So I did go to tier 1 firms, but I always went to the undesirable roles, the ones that nobody hears about and nobody goes for. And then I leveraged my networking skills and stuff like that to kind of sneak my way into the good positions.
Very similar to myself. Like I don't necessarily have the best pedigree of background to get into these top universities, and we've all applied. But again, like the applications could be pretty much pointless, really, isn't it? The actual statistics are very, very low, so it's very unlikely.
Well, yeah. So I'm actually having a back and forth with someone on LinkedIn about this. You look at statistics, nothing I've done makes any sense. Everything I've done is a 0% chance. Just the way I tripled my take-home pay in less than 3 years in banking, and the fact that I landed such coveted roles with such an odd background, all this is 0%, 0%. I remember when I made my return to Morgan Stanley, a few days after being on the sales and trading desk, I was waiting for a train, and this fellow Jagdish, who used to be on my team back when I was in IT, he saw me and he came over to me and said, "Hey, Mark, I hear you're back at Morgan Stanley." I said, "Yep, I am." He said, "You're in sales and trading now?" I said, "Yeah, I am." He said, "How on earth did you pull that off?" And I replied to him, I sent someone an email. It was a little bit of a haughty reply, but my point was, have you ever tried? Like, no. And because nobody tries, there's a 0% chance.
What was it that made that change? So let's say you're working in, bit of backstory, so you were in risk, and to make that move, what do you think was really ignited that actually possibility?
Well, hold on. I was in risk IT, and that is very, very different. When you look at in major banks, each division you look at is its own little company, essentially. You look at a company like Morgan Stanley or State Street, and you're dealing with close to 100,000 employees. A department like risk management has 10 to 15,000 employees. That's a huge company in itself. And within that, you have the risk managers and the front office risk managers who are the number one within that organization. They get paid the best. They get the best bonus. They get the best benefits. They're the most visible. And then you have whether it's the project managers or product managers, depending on what division you're in, what company you're in, or what kind of structure, and they interact face to face with the risk managers, and they're kind of the second guard. And then you'll have the IT people who develop the product themselves. They're the programmers essentially, and they're all the way in the back, called the back office. So when you're a developer in risk management, you're essentially the back office of the back office, because risk managers are not front office in a bank. That's the way I always looked at it. I mean, I don't think publicly I can state my numbers, but my first year bonus was hilarious. When you think about what I made in the front office, it's just absolutely hilarious. And I think I did a pretty good job my first year. But that's what you get for being back office and back office.
Yeah, it's the reality of it. I get you. In terms of the actual position, you know. So to go like a layer above, I think what I wanted to get into today was about like building a career that you actually love. And like to you, how do you think about going about do that? Because like for a lot of people, they might fall into roles, but for you, what was it that made you kind of want to change role in particular, as well as making that move around the bank? Because not a lot of people do it.
So I think a mistake many people make, myself included, is they try to find the role that they love or the role that's perfect for them. And not only does that not exist, the entire concept is a fallacy, because when somebody's coming out of school and they're just learning some skills and they have no experience in the professional world, the answer is no roles are perfect for you. No roles are right for you. What happens is, as you develop yourself in your career, you pick up skills as you're working and you become comfortable with those skills. And more often than not, that becomes your niche and that becomes what you love doing. You see people who have worked in investment banking for 30 years and they're senior bankers and they're making millions of dollars and they love it. But you know what? Had those same individuals who are very hard workers fallen into a programmer role early in their career, they'd be managing a team of developers and they'd be an amazing programmer and they'd love that. So it's not that they, and if you ask them, like, how'd you find this perfect career? They'll always say the same thing. I got lucky. No, you didn't get lucky at all. You're just a hard worker. And the role that you fell in, you doubled down on it. You worked very hard. You actually hated many years of it because your hours were ridiculous and because your managers were mean to you or whatever it was. But eventually you became so good at it. And so, you know, this became your thing and your identity that, yeah, you love it now. So it's not, I don't think it's really called luck. I think it's called hard work.
Yeah, and I think that's really just back to the actual individual. So like it's the people that have put in those hard yards that kind of figure out what they're good at, what they're bad at. Because like for me, like I was in a technical role and I just naturally hated it. I know obviously you have a bit of a SQL background as well, and like, that's initially where I was positioned. But I much more enjoyed the client work in consulting, working directly with clients, delivering value at front, making things, developing things, but not necessarily like the actual building. And that's kind of what I picked from it. I didn't enjoy my time in consulting, but it was nice because I was able to figure out what I was good at. And actually, more importantly, I figured out what I was really bad at. Now, I could have improved those skills, but I think it was a good indicator to say, all right, okay, you know, talking, communication, managing stakeholders and delivering projects is what I was really good at and what I really enjoyed. And then I kind of doubled down on that. And that's kind of the kind of path I kind of see now. Even though, as you said, you can go through the shittest manager, it can be as challenging as times, but it's just about kind of finding out that kind of balance.
Yes, I think you raise a really good point, which is there are two aspects. There's the work hard aspect, and then there's the I'm just not good at this thing. Now, I think most people who say I'm just not good at this are actually just really bad employees. And that's a lot of people. And you'll never see this talked about on LinkedIn or any professional sites because nobody wants to be that influencer who's telling people that they're bad. But having worked on many teams and being a bad employee myself, there are these people and there are a lot of them. So the way scrutiny happens by job interviews or stuff like that, it's not nonsense. There are people who just don't put an effort. And this whole, I'm getting sidetracked, so I do want to come back to my thought, but the whole work from home thing, there's a very good reason why CEOs and companies are against this. I'm not saying it's 100% justified, but there are tons of people who start work very late, don't put in as many hours, take massive lunch breaks, and watch YouTube while working, while they're working from home. So while everyone's crying, oh, look how great we work from home, no, a lot of people are slackers. So bring it back to what I was saying before. If somebody knows they're a hard worker and somebody really is putting in effort, and not enjoying something or not doing well, that person can come to the realization or have someone help them come to the realization that this is just not your thing. But you have to make sure that that's it. And it's not just that you're a lazy worker who just doesn't do well. And I mean, for myself as well, I started off in risk IT. So I was writing technical documents basically. That's what I was doing. Then I went to, then I did some actual risk management. Then I went to State Street, where I was a client
Same. I was in State Street as well.
Yeah. So I was a client-facing risk analyst, where I actually would look at client portfolios, put it through our risk tool, and then I would help the clients with the questions they have with this stuff. And that's what I thought I wanted to do. I thought I wanted to get as close to the clients as possible. And through all that, honestly, in both of those roles, in risk IT and at State Street, I feel like I was not a great employee. I did not do my job well. And if I was my own manager, I would not have been happy with myself in both of those roles. And then I went back to Morgan Stanley, and I did this sales and trading role where I actually was programming like 80% of my day. And if you asked me, Mark, are you a programmer? I'd be like, no, I have massive personality. I am meant to be sales. But I loved that job at Morgan Stanley, and that's where I excelled. And I built incredible tools and made the desk millions of dollars. It's just, like, who knows? But that's what clicked for me. And that's what made me
How was that learning curve, Mark, in terms of like you sit down to pick this up, 80% of your day is programming? Like, what was it like at first? Because programming is the most challenging element towards the learning curve.
So what do you mean, what was the learning curve?
As in, like, how difficult
manage my time?
How difficult was it to pick something up that, let's say, you weren't necessarily like fluent at beforehand, if you didn't have a background, didn't necessarily like, did you find that the most challenging element, or was there other aspects of it?
Okay, so with the role that I was in, being a desk strat at Morgan Stanley, you're not like a full-fledged programmer. I mean, you have to know how to program pretty well. And I would say I had the basics. I mean, I already had Script Uni live, so I already knew how to program and was already teaching programming. But to the extent that I was building tools for the trading team, I was not that proficient. And I spent a ton of time on Stack Overflow, reading books, watching tutorials online, and learning. What's challenging about being a good and efficient, rapid developer who could just churn out code and useful product? It's not the programming skills. It's the time management, and it's the putting your face on the keyboard and just not getting up until what you need to be done is done. It's the complete commitment to it. And this is back to what I was saying, like, you have to be a good employee to be a good developer, because when somebody would say, hey, we need this tool in 2 weeks, realistically, you need to put like 60 hours of programming into that. If you start messing around and, yeah, like I said, watching YouTube videos on the side, taking long lunch breaks, or breaking up your time, an hour here, then I'll do my emails and this, and not being smart about how you spend your time, there's no way you're going to get it done in time.
And do you think, in terms of like the way it's kind of situated now, in terms of, like you said, on LinkedIn, people aren't talking about the downside, like as in you don't have the skills, you haven't been working hard enough for it. Some companies are kind of setting that up with like performance appraisals, like we're only telling you the positive sides. And that's actually happening in certain companies. They're not telling you where you can drastically improve. And there should be a bit more of an emphasis on that, to say that, if you were tighter with your time, you could be delivering this and be able to get actually better results, versus, oh, we need to just, make sure there's a nice balance.
Yeah. Whatever company is giving people just positive feedback is doing them a tremendous disservice. Anybody on my teams, I'll leave it as a plural, on Morgan Stanley that hears this next bit is going to smile. But I had a manager that was a nightmare for me. Anyone who knows me or who talked to me at the time knows I was extremely stressed all the time. It was a difficult time. That manager really, I don't know if micromanage is the right word, but really gave it to me and showed me week on week that I was not managing my time right. And I felt very stressed out a lot. And my wife told me, like, why don't you quit? Why don't you go do something else? And I kept responding, no, I need this. And now, looking back in the projects I'm working on and the teams I have working for me, I can say 300% I am so much better because of that. And without this manager, my projects would all just fail. I learned so much, and I am forever grateful.
It's kind of that tough love that you need as well. You don't, if someone just kind of holds your hand the entire way, you're not really necessarily going to like improve. So there needs to be like an ebb and flow. And maybe that was like too scrutinious for yourself, or if it's for someone who's a little more sensitive. But generally speaking, you need someone to come down a bit harder on you. Otherwise, you're not going to progress. And like, that's a big thing people walk away from, is they're saying, okay, you know, I'm not getting everything that I need. The manager's being too hard. And the exact same thing happened to me, even when I was in State Street. Very, very intense like review, pointing a lot of the gaps and the holes in my work ethic, even. And even you're saying about a bad employee, like not necessarily contributing as much as I should. And even though at the time you think it's the worst thing ever, you do need it, and then you can just go learn from it and progress. I think that's what people are kind of lacking sometimes, is the fact that they're not necessarily wanting to hear the downside and where they need to improve.
Yeah. So it's funny because at the time I had this really difficult manager who, again, I am so thankful for having. At the time, I had another manager who very rarely gave me negative feedback, and was very kind and kind of felt like my best friend and mentor for however long he was my manager. So it was really interesting having both ends of the spectrum. But he had this line that he would always tell me, and I think it's fabulous. And that line is, if you're ever seeing anything on your performance review, and that's the first time you're hearing it, then your manager's not doing a good job. You should never be surprised by a performance review. In fact, at State Street, this was one of the biggest complaints I had, and it's why I left the company ultimately. Because one of my first few weeks there, I went to my manager and I said, hey, look, I've just been through a few years where I had some good managers, bad managers, and I've done some good things, and I've had some bad performances myself. I want to make sure that we work well together. Do you mind if I put a, half an hour once a week on your calendar and we could discuss my performance? And he said, no. He said, that would be a waste of time. We sit right near each other. And I said, yeah, but it's very hard to naturally give feedback if we have a designated time when we can review. And he said, no, that feels like a waste of time to me. Guess what? Year end came and I got a review I completely was not expecting. And our relationship just went downhill from there. You can't do that. You have to be always talking. Your manager has to be talking for good and bad always. One of my best managers ever. So most people would not do well with that very, very tough manager I had. There was no love. It was all tough. Most people wouldn't do well. And I was on the verge of cracking. And I did basically cry to a lot of people, but I feel like I needed that. And it really helped me. But I did have a manager back in 2014 who had the perfect balance, I think, for most people, where we'd meet once a week. And he always opened with, this is where I see you need improvement. There was like, it wasn't a discussion. There were some meetings. There was actually only one in our year of him being my manager. There was only once when he opened the meeting and said, I have no critical feedback for you. It was the craziest thing for me
Christmas
to hear.
week.
But every other meeting opened with, this is where you need to improve. And it hurt so much. And I remember being stressed out the first few weeks. And then I got used to it. I was like, okay, I'm ready for this. Where can I improve? And he'd always come with like emails that I sent, because I would CC him in everything. And emails that I printed, you can word this better. This was too aggressive. You didn't get back fast enough on this. And I'm like, that's the way we opened every meeting. And I just got used to it. But there was always some love in his meetings. So I think that's why it would be like kind of that balance for most people.
And I think with remote working now, you do have the opportunity to create those weekly meetings, because that's exactly what I have in Revolut. Like I had it with my line manager, I had it with my new line manager now. And there's a weekly meeting, and sometimes, it could be light, could be 15 minutes, sometimes it could be 35 minutes, but it's in the calendar and it's like in place. So I think there was a bit of room there to say, okay, I'm going to set this up. And I've seen a dramatic improvement in myself, because even if it like subconscious, it comes to Friday when I was, and it's like, fuck, I need to kind of get myself in check and make sure I'm aligned, and checking my KPIs and making sure my targets are aligned. And it's kept me honest, I think. And that's what's been really good. And to contrast, like previous companies, I didn't have that. So then when it goes to performance review, which is in January, oddly enough, there's kind of like, we're working towards a goal. And if I do miss it, then okay, there was visibility there. And that's kind of something that I kind of recommend people. But for people that are not in those fortunate positions that it's already set up, like how do you recommend like starting these relationships? Because in large companies, it might be the same in MS. When I was in Accenture, like a line manager could have 15, 20 people or more sometimes. They don't necessarily have a one-to-one relationship. And it may seem quite awkward to maybe send that message, send that Slack message or Microsoft Teams or whatever.
Yeah, you got to do what I did at State Street. Point blank, Just got to tell your manager, can we please have 10 minutes? Literally 10 minutes a week. Everyone can afford that, no matter how big your team is. Can we have 10 minutes a week? I'll put some time in your calendar. I would just like to review all the projects I'm working on or my performance in general. I want to make the best of my time here. I want to make the best of my career, and I want to be the best possible employee on your team. Let's make that happen. And if your manager says no, like mine did, was take it from my advice and get off that team as fast as possible, because that's not a good place to grow.
100% agree. So I want to get into getting hired. So you said you didn't come from a finance background, and you made that transition. What do you think some of like the biggest challenges are when people are getting hired and trying to get those roles and they don't come from that experience? Where should they kind of focus? Where's a lot of lost time kind of being put into at the moment?
So this is where it gets really tricky, because general advice is generally bad advice. Every case is so different. My case was so unusual. I taught for years. I was a professional musician. And then I made 6 figures selling things on eBay. Like all the stuff doesn't show up in my LinkedIn profile anymore. Yeah, my life was quite different. So everybody just has a very different story. And for some people, CFA is right. For some people, FRM is right. For some people, a master's degree is right. And for some people, just networking with people in your community is right. So every case is different. That's why I love career coaching so much, because it's never me having the same conversation with somebody ever. It's always completely different. So give me a scenario. Give me a specific scenario, and I will go through this as I would a client.
So let's say you are coming out of a generic BCom business degree, which is very common in Europe. You do something like commerce, and then you're trying to break into a particular industry. Now, usually what happens, someone like consulting might say you don't have enough tech experience. Somewhere like finance might say you don't have specific finance experience. And then you'd be turned away at interview stage. What would you do in those scenarios? Because I know a large proportion of my audience would fall into that category.
Okay, so just to make sure I understand this picture, bachelor's degree, are you still in school or have you graduated already?
You're in your final year. So you're finding your graduate role, or else you could be just finished. You have a bit of experience. Internships are very common in Ireland and Europe in general. So what would you do in those particular scenarios?
Okay, so again, I'm sorry, I need a little more information. So I'm very nitpicky with these things. Okay, so internships. Let's say 2 internships. Are the internships relevant to experience or not?
Probably not. Usually, they're just feeder from right out of the university, so they do the kind of partnerships.
Okay, so not relevant internships, and you're trying to get an entry-level job in something you're in your final year. So I'm not so familiar with the Ireland market. In the US, pretty much if you're in your final year and you haven't secured an offer at a major bank, I'll talk finance because that's all I really know. If you haven't secured a final offer or like a final internship, because the sales and trading, the investment banking jobs, analyst roles are not given out to graduates, period. It's you have your sophomore or your junior, whatever it is, depending on when you got it, internships, and then you have your senior internship, which then comes with an offer afterwards. And there are never analyst positions handed out, certainly not first year. So I'm going to assume we're not talking about the absolute tier 1 roles, because those, quite frankly, don't exist, certainly in the US. For a tier 2 role, if we're going to call it that. So you have your options. Your options are to either make a very compelling resume, which many people do not do. So specifically, if you take these internships and you write them as they are on your resume and you make them look like they're irrelevant, then yeah, you're fighting from behind. One of the things I really focus on when I help people write their resumes, like actually, if you go to my website, you look, I have this thing called resume coaching, which is very bizarre. I've never heard of it from anyone else. I never think I'll hear about it from anyone else, but it's something that I'm pretty passionate about. And that is, and I teach people how to use their irrelevant experience to look like relevant experience. Step 1 would be on your resume, you make the experience look relevant. And as an example, I'm sure you're aware, I have a resume book coming out in a few months. And one of the stories that I highlight was a coaching client I had. And it's a woman who for 6 years worked as a dental assistant. And I helped her land the role as a financial analyst. And the way we did that was because I looked at her resume and all the experience she had collecting money from customers. She actually would stand there with a toothbrush and like clean people's teeth. But I made the 6 years, I helped her make the 6 years experience look very relevant. So she also organized information about the clients she did in Excel. So we turned it into this whole bullet about pivot tables, managing client accounts, collecting money from people. That's account receivables. We made it sound really good. And it ended up sounding like a finance role. And she literally spent half her time brushing people's teeth. None of it was a lie.
Yeah.
It's how
it
you
is
sell
true. Like, of course, it's how you sell yourself. Exactly.
Yeah. So that's stage one, is making your resume look very good. And with relevant or irrelevant experience that looks relevant, you should definitely be getting some interview offers. Some of your applications should hit.
I have
At
a
the same
question for you, if you
time,
don't mind.
sure.
Do you apply a similar or the same CV for multiple jobs because they're in the same industry, or because they're in the same industry, would you keep it consistent? How does that work?
Every industry has sub-industries, and sub-industries have sub-industries. So what I tell my clients is you can't make yourself crazy and rewrite your resume for every job you're applying. However, if there are some jobs that you really, really want, those jobs that are the number one on your list, those you should probably take some special care and make your resume look perfect for those roles. One of the things that I go through in the book is that the first few lines of your resume will definitely be read. After a few lines, you have to assume that 90% of the hiring managers or recruiters are not even going to read that far. So literally the first section, and they're done with your resume. So the best way to combat this, or to use it to your advantage, is the jobs you're applying for. You look at those job specs or the job descriptions. You find where in those job descriptions they align well with your skills. So for example, if you're going for a programming role, and one of the things is at least 5 years experience in Python, or whatever it is, 2 years experience in Python, and you happen to be a very competent Python developer, I would put one of your Python projects at the very top of your resume. And that way, the very first thing they see, oh, build out a trading tool in Python, that's perfect for this role. And it just, your resume kind of matches the job application, which is pretty cool. Now, if you use the same resume that you applied for every other finance role for, that just wouldn't show up in the top half of your resume. Python would be a skill all the way in the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's impossible to do this for every job you're applying, but the ones that are the most attractive to you, I would say, yeah, maybe. But certainly you should have categories like the sub-industries. If so, finance, for example, there'd be investment banking, there'd be sales and trading, there'd be risk management. Those resumes should always look very different. And I would have one for each of those.
Mm-hmm. But in particular, let's say if you're coming from a scenario where you might not have like sufficient experience and you're doing that kind of matching, do you look at the role, the specific role you're looking for, and then you're really creating a CV around that then? And then every single like deliverable is kind of tying back to that, because maybe you're trying to make a transition, trying to move from one industry to the next. And often if they're looking for that subject matter expertise, let's say if it is in like a specific element of finance, that can be quite hard for people to come across. And I actually did a YouTube video on this recently about how I moved across. And how I moved across was kind of similar to how you said it. Was like step one was looking at the role. So my current role and the future role, it was a senior BA over to project manager. And then I looked at that actual specific role itself, so the role specification. So then I knew for interview time, I knew like my actual nuts and bolts. And then my step 3 then was to look at my gaps, like the real gaps now, which was genuine finance, like jargon. I know you do a lot of that on. And then I was trying to work around to try to upskill and try to learn some side courses, following news, keep up to date on markets. Then I went into my interview and I had genuine gaps, but then I was able to focus my energy on the first step and what I had done and how relevant that is towards the new industry I want to move towards.
Yeah. Well, so one of the things you mentioned, I just want to focus on is the fact that you really don't have experience in
Yeah.
this area you're trying to get into. And to that, I say, okay, so what? The traditional resume is viewed as sort of a historical document of the things you've done. I never look at a resume that way. In fact, I'm sorry for like sounding like I'm trying to sell my book. It's not even out yet. But the whole focus of it is your resume is not a historical document. It's your advertisement. Would you advertise that you're lacking in experience in the role you're trying? That just doesn't make sense. Like, why
Mhm.
would you do that to yourself? So my resumes actually never, I think for the past 8 years, my resumes never started with an experience section. I don't have a summary section either. I don't believe in that. But my resume always starts with a skills section, because what I can do then is if I'm let's just say I had no experience in risk management, for example, and I
Mhm.
decided I want to move into risk. No experience whatsoever. What I would do is spend 2 weeks talking to risk managers. And by the way, this is kind of going back to the question I was in the middle of answering before we got sidetracked. What should you do if you're trying to get into that role that you have no experience in? So, a very healthy step one would be to reach out on LinkedIn to people that you are either from the same town, same university, specifically at the most junior levels, because these people actually use LinkedIn and they will give you the time of day because their time, it's not, they don't feel like their time is as valuable. Of course it is, but they're more junior and they're willing to help more. And you speak to them, and the most important question you can ask them is, how do you spend your day? Day in the life kind of thing. I want to know the exact skills that you use in the job, and you take notes like crazy on those calls, and you learn all the skills they do. And if you're talking to a risk manager and they say, well, so I'm looking at the portfolio VAR, and you say, whoa, what does VAR stand for? And they say, you don't know what VAR is? And you write down on the paper, never ask what is VAR again. And you go through these conversations, and then you talk to the next risk manager and you say, yes, I assume you're checking VAR daily. Oh, of course you're checking VAR. Which methods do you use? And then they tell you some more information, and you write this stuff down and you learn a lot about all these skills. And then you go to Google, you go to Investopedia and you check value at risk Investopedia. There's a fantastic piece. It's 3 pages long. I think by reading that, you have a good chance of becoming a risk manager just by that 3-page Investopedia document. So then what do? I do this with my clients all the time. If they're applying for a risk role, the very first line in the resume is something they have no experience in. And it's
Mhm.
from that Investopedia page. And it says, experience calculating VAR using the Monte Carlo, variance, covariance, and historical methods. That is such a powerful line because value at risk is the most important metric for risk management in banks. Those are the 3 popular quantitative methods for calculating that. Do they care, or will they even notice that you don't actually have work experience doing that? It doesn't really matter. You put that down as a skill, which means you're confident talking about it. And guess what? On the interview, if they say, oh, I see you have experience with either of these methods, I mean, that conversation can go either one of 2 ways. Either they'll say, in which role do you have experience? And you can respond, actually, none. I've never done this on a job. But I know I'm applying for a risk position. I don't want to seem like somebody with no experience here. So I downloaded a bunch of test data sets. I learned about these methods and I've been practicing. And if you'd like to have a go at me, ask me any question you can about them. And I'm pretty sure I'll answer them well. And even if it doesn't go that far, you're asking to be asked on that. It's your first line in your resume and they will challenge you. How does this work? What would you do in this scenario? And of course, you've been studying it. You can knock it out of the park. So what does it
Mhm.
matter that you didn't actually do it at an internship or a role?
I love that because people are so afraid that when it gets to the interview stage, they're going to just grill them completely. Now, as you said, they may ask you, but there's a difference between asking you and then like wanting you to really demonstrate it. And people often forget that when you're interviewing, especially for a graduate role or even just slightly after graduate role, you're going to learn and they're going to teach you. There's an element of onboarding and there's an element of learning, and there's a bit of a ramp up period. So even if you aren't fully fluent in risk or whatever particular area it is, they're gonna be taught it and they're gonna teach you. So I think people kind of talk themselves down and don't apply for the bigger positions because they're too afraid that things will go against them maybe.
Yeah, the most important interviewing skill is confidence, and it's also the most challenging. And people don't think about that, which is why almost all my clients focus all their energies on either applying for a job or getting their resume perfect, and they don't have enough mock interviews. And the truth is, if you sound confident and you have the right method, you can win anything. When I got into that sales and trading role at Morgan Stanley and my salary just went through the roof, I was not qualified at all. I came in at a senior associate level to sales and trading, which I've never done, to securities lending, which I've never done, doing all this Python development and VBA development, which I've never done professionally. Like everything that was my job requirement, no experience in. And at one of the top banks in the world, in my opinion, the best bank in the world, I got it. So how did I get it? I got it by having the conversation of, that is correct. I've never done this on a job, but I've taught it. I've taught Python for years. I've taught VBA for years. I've built my own tools. I am really confident in this. In fact, I pulled out a manila envelope and I pulled out reports that I built in Tableau and ClickView, which I knew was something the team did. And I handed it to the hiring manager. And I said, look at these. This wasn't a team effort. I built these myself from scratch. You need somebody who can just, get a task and just build it from the ground up. I can do that. And I'm willing to learn, and I will learn whatever needs to be done. It's that confidence. You can't challenge it when somebody's so confident, but most people aren't. And they're not because they don't practice enough in the interviews. They don't challenge themselves. They don't have people ask them the difficult questions.
You also need that as well for the role itself. Like, because let's say you said there, we go back to the very beginning where we had a 2-week turnaround and it's very intense. You need someone who is confident and they're not, over cocky or whatever, but someone who's actually confident in their ability that will sit down, not melt in the seat, number one, and get through their work, which is quite interesting because then it goes to the interview stage. You're like, okay, I back this guy or girl and it's the best person for the role. And that's really important,
Yeah, I do agree. But I wouldn't discount how important confidence is specifically for interviews. And it's so rare. Like one of the reasons I think it's so important, the example I give everyone is when the manager's on vacation, you are basically writing emails for the manager. If you write a bad email or you offend people, nobody's going to say to the manager, how come your employee did this? They're going to say, your team messed up. The manager did something wrong. You're basically an extension of your manager's hand. How does your manager know they can trust you? When they see somebody walk into an interview just overflowing with confidence, that makes them feel really good. Oh, I'll be able to leave everything in this person's hand. This feels like a good hire.
Yeah, 100%. You said something cool there around salary and how, you did make that change and your salary exponentially increased. But for young people, how much should salary come into play and when should it not become a factor? Like if you're going to try to figure out your ideal role, should you be focusing on combination of the role and the salary, or should there be another way to approach this? How do you think about that?
So as with the other answer I gave you, it's obviously a case-by-case basis. The two most important questions you need to ask yourself are, how much money do I absolutely need to survive? I was on a Zoom call. I offered on LinkedIn randomly like 2 weeks ago, hey, whoever responds to this, I'm going to invite you to a Zoom session. We'll just do Q&A for no reason. So I let everyone on that call know exactly how much money I need to survive. And they were almost drowning in their own breath. They couldn't believe it. And it's crazy. The amount of money I need to pay for my kids' tuition and pay my mortgage is what most people consider fabulously wealthy. And that's me living paycheck to paycheck. So you have to understand exactly where you are in terms of family, lifestyle, what you need to survive. That number is something you absolutely need to make, whether you make it as a salary or with side money. I always made double what my salary was from doing side stuff, whether it's script uni or coaching. I used to give music lessons on Sunday to just groups of kids. So whatever it took, my goal was always to double my salary on the side. And I kept that in mind when I was looking at how much money I made and what I needed to. So that's step one. How much money do you need to make? And then there's the growth potential of your salary. So I just had a client who I thought was worth making a certain salary. I believed that his potential was at a certain level, and he took nearly $40,000 less as a base salary and accepted an offer, which I thought was a little funny. Like I told him, I said, I'll be honest, I think you're worth more. And he argued, this is a great firm. It's a good team, and I want to grow here. you know, absolutely, it was enough for him. And he's right. It was a fabulous team. They wanted to help him grow, and it was just something he didn't have experience in that area. It was for all the right reasons. It was good. And the one reason why I'm never too comfortable telling people, yes, do this. And by the way, if you ask most coaches, they'll say this. They'll say, focus on the team, focus on the firm name, focus on the position, money will come. That's not always great advice because money grows at a certain speed. So if you take way less than the industry average, it's going to take you a very long time to catch up. Traditionally, I was an exception because I never accepted a job offer without another offer at the same time. I'm an extremely good negotiator. So I played it very differently than most people will. But for a traditional role where you're going to get salary increases or leave for another role, you have to think within a role, maybe you'll get a 5 or 10% increase on a really good year. And leaving, maybe if you're amazing, you'll get a 20% salary increase. But if you're starting really low, it's going to take you a very long time to catch up with the normal. So,
yeah, because what I often see as well, especially in Europe, in terms of like, well, mainly in terms of kind of startups, is the fact that to pull you across and to get you to leave a current startup, they will try to give you a lot more money. So you said 20% there. It could nearly be towards 30 or 40% for particular firms, smaller firms. But then I always think, like, I don't know the answer to this, but it's like, if you do move across to something like that, will that actually limit your ability? Because you found yourself now in a good position and now you seem quite desirable and you're getting a couple of offers. But then if you move, does that mean you potentially might restrict yourself from making more money? But there's a trade-off. So that's kind of what I always kind of think. And now, you know, if you're moving from Morgan Stanley to Goldman, maybe it's all kind of great and rosy. But if for people that don't have that clear cut, there's a firm improvement. They don't know much about the team. They don't know much about the role because it's a bit more gray. What do you think?
It's always a trade-off. I mean, whenever you're leaving for 20, 30%, whatever it is, you're not making that increase just because you're leaving one firm and you're going to another. You're making that increase also because now you can't move for 2 more years or it looks really bad on your resume. So if you look at my profile right now, I've done some funky stuff in the past year, but that's basically because I said, I'm done. I love coaching. I'm having a lot of success with it. Script Uni is doing great. I think it's time that I kind of scaled back working for corporate America. So with that mindset, I took some risks. I tried out sales. I did this, I did that. So it looks a little jumpy. But before then, my career was very, very carefully calculated and planned out. And every move I made career-wise, I made a lot more than 20%. I won't go into the numbers, but I really negotiated hard and never went into one offer without having another offer in my hand. Every single time I switched, I had more than one offer, which I understand that's not always possible for people to pull off, but I planned it very well. Yeah, I don't think it's so clear cut, and I think it is scary. I've always gotten the advice, never take less than 20% to leave, but that's what traditional professionals always say. But there's too much to take into account. What if you hate your job? What if you know you're about to get fired? All these things, you have to take them into account. So there's just so many variables. It's a hard question to answer.
100%. So how did you approach negotiations? Because like for yourself, I can tell, you know, you carry yourself really well, speak really well. What was it that you did in particular to get yourself new roles as well as get those salary increases?
That same word, confidence. This is the way it always went down. It went down with, all right, Mark, so we're prepared to give you an offer, you know, 100,000 or whatever it is. And my response is always like, all right, I'll be honest, I'm pretty close to receiving an offer from another firm, so I can't accept this offer just yet. Give me a few days, I'll get back to you. I do really want to work for you, but I can't do this to myself. And they always were understanding. I understand sometimes it might not work that way. And then I'd get back to them and say, would you mind having a phone call? I never thought this was an appropriate thing to do via email or message. And we'd either get on the phone or Zoom or meet in person. And I'd say, look, I know you're offering me 100, but I have 120. And it's honestly on a front office desk. I'll be working in sales and trading, and I'll be getting a much larger bonus than I think you guys would be offering. So I'm sorry, I can't do anything this low. And I won't tell them what I want. I'll just leave it like that. You know, it's 20,000 more than you're offering, plus the bonus will be better, and let them come back to me. And every time I've had that conversation, I never had to negotiate a second time. The offer came back way higher than the first one. So that just worked out. But if I didn't have that second offer to fall back on, I wouldn't have had the confidence or the story, honestly, to sell myself. And I probably would have had to just accept it. It's very hard to negotiate for yourself when you don't have something else.
Mm. So even in those scenarios, would you have given up that role for the other role? Let's say you weren't necessarily happy, or was that part of your actual kind of like technique to say that I have this other role that I actually will take?
It very much depends. I mean, you're asking for me specifically. In one case, I honestly had such a bad relationship with my manager that I thought that either I was going to get fired, he was going to get fired, something was going to go south pretty soon. So I'm not sure if I would have accepted that role or accepted a role at a different firm at a lower price. But I was prepared to leave in one case. But generally, like I said, and you know what? If someone's confident enough, not that I'm giving this advice out to people, if you're confident enough that you think you can go in and play that you have another offer and you don't, maybe go for it. It's all about confidence, but you want to negotiate, you have to let them know that there are other people who want you and other people want you at a certain price, and then you can fetch more money. At a starting out level, at a junior level, you can't do that. I mean, so my first role in risk IT, I'm going to be very frank here, from all the financial engineering graduates at Brew College, I'm pretty confident that I got the lowest starting salary and the lowest bonus. And I think a few years later, I was one of the best paid graduates. So obviously I'm different. I negotiate extremely well. I'm a very good networker. So not the same story as everyone, but I mean, my point is, yeah, to your point, it's important to be strategic about your career than get the highest number up front.
You get a bit more leverage when you go further on and you're delivering more projects or delivering really good caliber work, is what I find. Because funny you said that. Similar scenario happened to me. So my best mate guy is very, very intelligent, very, very like, high IQ, top of his class, top of her class. He negotiated like a really good salary with his role, and he was going to leave, and they offered him shitload more money essentially. Then I was going to do something similar, and when I said I was going to leave, they said, "Okay, perfect. When is it you're handing in your resume?" So it can work two sides. They were like, "Okay, we're not going to give you a counter offer," and it could be how it's said and done. At the time, I was still pretty young, so it wasn't like I'd done huge work and hadn't had a massive impact. Whereas now, not saying that I'm in a position now, but I think when someone has a couple more years experience, they have a lot more to show for their work. And I think that's a big thing, is the fact that I suppose in my particular role as well, it's all about delivery. As a project manager, it's about just delivering projects. So I think it adds a bit more value. And that's kind of what I'm trying to get across, the fact that maybe for people that are listening, they may not be able to have the same ability right now, but these conversations become important because there will come a time whereby you want to have these difficult conversations. And they're quite difficult as well to have with your line manager, whoever is responsible.
Yeah. And I know this wasn't a question or even a topic for today, but I just want to say one thing. It's like a Mark Ross patent pending thing. I don't know anybody else who does it, but I get a question a lot, which is people looking at my LinkedIn profile see that I worked at Numerix. Then I went to Morgan Stanley, Street Morgan Stanley, and then Numerix hired me again after I left them. And then some people look at my profile and they see I worked at Morgan Stanley, State Street, and then Morgan Stanley hired me again. How do these firms keep taking me back after I leave? So either I got fired or left, but in both cases, they took me back. And leaving with grace is so underrated. A few things I do that I'm very proud of. I came up myself. No one gave me this advice, and I always encourage people to do. If you're going to leave, you speak to everybody who you've ever talked to who's more senior to you. You get them behind closed doors, and you tell them how much you appreciated working for them, what you've learned from them, and how much they meant to you, and you still want to keep in touch. And then, right before you leave, you give them a box of chocolates and a thank you note that is truly heartfelt and handwritten. My hand is still hurting from the notes I wrote at Numerix when I left this time. But I meant them from the bottom of my heart, and I wrote those notes all the way up to the CEO and delivered them each, a box of chocolates and very important heartfelt note. And you know how many other employees have done stuff like that? I guarantee you it's zero in the entire history of the company. They'll never forget my exit. They'll always have a place in their heart, and it's such an easy thing to do. It costs a couple dollars, and not only are you always welcome back, but when they think of you, they're not going to think of that employee who left for a different firm. They're going to think of that employee who left more graciously than any other employee ever. So I know it didn't answer any question we talked about, but I think it's important to stay on a career talk like this.
No, that's right. But it's like, it's a small world though, you know, at the end of the day. And even if you're in the world of finance or wherever it is, or whatever place you are in the world, you know, now people obviously know you for multiple reasons now, but I'm saying when you were young and you were leaving in that good way, it just comes back to pay dividends for you, I think. And a lot of people don't anticipate that, because we've kind of fallen into a period whereby 2 years is enough. Now, that's not say that's right or wrong, but that's the kind of attitude is, okay, 2 years, go and move on. And I remember even in my graduate role, people would ask you at the beginning, where do you want to go afterwards? I was barely in the door. I was in the door a couple of weeks, couple of months, and people were already thinking about their exit. I think when you're thinking about the back door already, it kind of sets a bad tone. And maybe that's why people look down on our generation and say that we're not good workers, because we're always thinking of the next thing. So if you leave graciously, you always have the opportunity, you can come back or do something else, or you need an advisor. And I think that's what's been good for me, is I've had people that have just been someone that I can lean on in times of need, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, a great answer to that question. If you are interviewing for a role and they ask you where you want to be in 2 or 5 years, a really good answer is, so you have to be very careful about how you answer that. Obviously, you don't want to say you want to go to a different firm, which a lot of my clients have told me that they answered in the past. I'm like, yeah, well, no wonder you haven't gotten hired yet. Don't say you want to leave the firm. Also, don't say you want to run the team, because then if you're talking to the manager, they're going to think that you're too ambitious and that you're going to get frustrated after not being promoted to manager in a few years. These are thoughts that go through their heads. You have to be very careful about how you word it. At the same time, saying, I want to do the same exact thing shows that you have no passion or drive. So it's a very specific answer you need to give, and you need to give the same answer every time. And that is, I love all this work. I love doing these technical aspects of the job. I definitely would want more responsibility. So if your job is a project manager now and you're managing smaller projects, I'd love to manage bigger scale projects. I'd love to be that person who stands in front of the head of the division and demonstrates what we've done, or gives the deck out, gives the presentation. So just take it a level further, but never mention managing or leaving the firm. Just taking what you're doing and bring it to the next level. That's just a really good answer to that question.
That's interesting, because I think there's so much like things to consider. They're not necessarily looking at just you. They could also look at their own position, check if they're in jeopardy, and check where's this person going to come into place, you know? So it's people used to always focus and think, okay, they need to say the best possible answer, that they want to manage a division. But that's not the reality, is it?
No. So I mean, this is one of the reasons why mock interviews are so important, because there are a list of like 20 or 30 questions that get asked at a majority of interviews, and there are correct answers to those questions, and you need to get them perfect every time, because answering any one of them wrong, why this company, these obvious boring questions could have such devastating effects if you answer them wrong. So make sure you have all those popular questions and have perfect answers to them.
Sweet. One of the last areas I want to get into was around accelerating career growth. So really kind of progressing in your career. We touched on the young professionals, but let's say we'll use example, because I know you want to use particular examples. So you're working in, it could be IT risk, it could be risk or anything, and you find yourself at an analyst role and you want to go to maybe associate or senior associate. What is it particularly you kind of see in some of the kind of best candidates that move on? What do they do particularly? Are they more technical focused? Are they more interpersonal? What are some of the main things you need to focus on?
So there's a lot of advice about this out there, and most of it's wrong. And the advice I used to give was mostly wrong. So, and that's because I have a pretty large ego and a pretty large personality. And I always thought, okay, there's a lot of people on this team. They're pretty good at what they do, but they aren't Mark Ross. They don't have my personality. I'm going to get in front of everyone. The CEO is going to know my name. The chief risk officer is going to know my name. And then I watched as people around me got promoted way faster. And I realized that step one and the most important rule to getting promoted fast is to do your main job very well. And that's just people like me who are ADD and they're all over the place, they tend to think, all right, I'm going to do my main job, and then I'm going to help with this, and then I'm going to help with that, and then I'm going to do this. And you know what? At Morgan Stanley, my division, I was head of the mentoring program. Oh, all these things look great. Why is everyone else getting promoted before me? And that's what it comes down to. It comes down to 95% of whether you're getting promoted or not is, are you a rock star in your main role? Are you over delivering in your main role? Are you firmly committed to it? And that is without a doubt the most important thing. I can say other things that are important. Visibility, sure, it's important, especially if you want to get promoted at the VP level and above. People in other regions have to know you exist. But that's not what gets you promoted fastest. It's just being that person that everyone can rely on, always getting your job done, knowing your manager, being confident when an email comes to you, you're going to respond within 5 minutes and with the perfect response. It doesn't have to be the right answer. It has to be the right response, which could be, I have time on my calendar tomorrow at this time. I'm going to look at it then. It doesn't have to be the answer every time, but they have to know that you are absolutely reliable and always deliver with your main task.
Do you think people focus on the factors outside of their work? So kind of like that side of desk stuff? Because I know a lot of big companies really push that and they want you to get involved. Does that take away from the main role sometimes? Because people try to bite off more they can chew.
I have to be honest. That's the image that big companies always give, is giving back and look how much our employees do for the community. But guess what? You look at those CEOs and those CFOs, the people making tens of millions of dollars, you look at their career history, they've done nothing. They did no volunteering. They never did No Shave November and had mustaches. That wasn't them. They just sat in their desk for 30 years and did their job. And that's how they're making tens of millions of dollars now. Now, I hate that. That is not my style. I will never be that. But you want to know the fastest way to progress your career? It's just do a really good job at your job. And that should be your absolute focus. I would say, even for your first few years of your career, do nothing but your job and do a really good job. Now, if you absolutely finished all your tasks, the next best thing you could do, yeah, it's probably a visibility thing. Like, ask your manager, look, I know I'm doing a really good job. Is there something within this division, such as a volunteering team or something, or helping look at resumes of incoming candidates? I'd like to be part of some committee where I can get some visibility. That is great. But the amount that actually impacts your career progression is so low. You really need to focus on doing your job well. And this is just not said enough. And the reason why I'm focusing so much on this and not saying the things that everyone wants you to hear, which is, it's about volunteering, it's about image, it's about visibility, because those all play such a small role and people always blow that out of proportion. It's really about time management, just doing your job well. I can't state that enough.
Yep. And even if you are working on something on the site, it's proportion, because I don't know what the review was like, but in Revolut you get marked, on particular areas, and same one as in Accenture, same in State Street. You're not getting marked on necessarily things outside of your realm, and especially the more stringent it gets, and then it becomes weighted. There's a lot of different factors and how it gets aggregated and baselined across different people. So yeah, it's just about getting the work done, isn't it, at the end of the day?
There's always that box on performance review or year end. What has Mark contributed outside of normal work that has helped whatever? But you could spend 3 hours cleaning up some dirt at a local park, and that just becomes some public volunteer work. That's great, and it fills the box, and nobody cares because your box is filled. So yeah, focus on your job.
100%. So the last area that I want to get into, the last couple of minutes, maybe 2-3 minutes, was all about kind of job fulfillment and job kind of purpose in your role. So you talked a little about working kind of hard, but how much for you has been around kind of finding a role that has kind of fulfillment and kind of purpose in? Because a lot of kind of my generation would be dissatisfied. Now maybe it might be dissatisfied because of different reasons, but how much of that did that play into your kind of thought process?
I have a problem personally, and that problem is when I'm around other people, I'm having a good time. So I've worked in risk IT. I've worked at State Street doing client-facing risk. I've worked in sales and trading. I've worked in sales, and I've loved every job just because I was around other people and I had a really good time. Actually, the worst point of my career was COVID. because I was stuck in my own little home, and it made me miserable. I love being around people. So there's no other real answer to that other than when I'm with other people, which is why I loved sales and trading so much. It's like sardines. We were all just like touching each other. I'd move my elbow to write in the keyboard and I'd knock the guy's hot sauce over his face because we were so close. So that's what I loved. But you have to love your job. I mean, to be a person who loves your job, I would say if you're going into work, spending time with people and enjoying people's company is a really big aspect to it. But aside from that, yeah, obviously make sure it's a job where you enjoy the main tasks you're doing. There's no way to train yourself to love your job. Like, as I kind of open this all up with, everyone comes in as a fresh graduate without a lot of experience, but as experience breeds comfort, and comfort leads to happiness ultimately. So as you do something more and more and become more familiar with it, you'll be more calm, you'll be less stressed, and then you'll just enjoy your job more. I don't think there's a magic sauce to that. It's just, if you're somebody who jumps around a lot and switches careers, you're going to be unhappy. If you're somebody who's done, I mean, I'm a very bad example, but if you've traditionally, if you're someone who's done, sales and trading, and then you went to risk, and then you went to compliance, and you're doing all these roles, and you think the next thing is going to be right for you, I guarantee you the next thing will be just as miserable, if not more. I can tell you with all my clients who have moved a lot, they always think that by moving, they're going to be more happy, and they always end up less happy when it's to switch careers, and they've done it a couple times, because at some point you have to look in the mirror and say, I'm just somebody who's either not doing a good job or not settling down, because constantly moving around makes you unhappy. But familiarity is what makes you just more calm.
Agree. I think you just kind of improve the skills, and then you're going to get more enjoyment from it, because what you enjoy, you're going to become good at, and what you're good at, you're also going to enjoy. It's kind of two factors working side by side. Over an hour. I'd say a massive thank you, Mark. This was really great podcast, because I think with your stuff, you've been there, you've done it. There's also no bullshit, and it's also a different perspective. You're not saying exactly what people might want to hear or what the narrative is. And I like it because you've obviously gone and implemented this yourself. And now you've done so much good things on the side as well. So I'd say a massive thank you.